Prof, good evening, and thank you very much for your time. Perhaps you can take our viewers through what was going on or through your mind as when you decided to pen this particular article.
No, thank you very much, Mr. Mbogo, and good evening to your listeners. First of all, the IFP is one of the old parties in the South African political dispensation. And like all other political parties, it has a constitution which basically guides its operations. So, given the fact that Mangosuthu Buthelezi has been the leader of the IFP since 1975, the expectation was that when the time came for him to hand over the baton, they will be guided by the Constitution and therefore elect someone following the constitutional imperatives. Unfortunately, in this case, they took a different turn. Instead of allowing the branches to do the nominations and then escalate the process up to the senior leadership or the national leadership, they decided to do it from the top. What happened then in the IFP is that the leadership of the party came together and deliberated on the matter as to who was going to be Buthelezi's successor. They then agreed that Mr. Hlabisa, Velenkosini Hlabisa, would be the right person to take over from Mangosuthu Buthelezi. So what happened then when the conference happened was that Hlabisa's name was not proposed by the branches, but it was proposed by the leadership of the party. So it was in that context that I said, if we look at the Constitution and then we look at what has happened, there is something interesting that is worth investigating. It was in that sense then that I said, let me put something down and then generate a discussion.
Was there something interesting or was there something wrong?
I wouldn't necessarily say there was something wrong. I would say there was something unconstitutional if you look at it from the outside. But the explanation you get from the leadership of the party is that by virtue of the fact that they didn't handpick Mr. Hlabisa, but they suggested his name, given the political context, especially of KwaZulu-Natal, where we've seen political squabbles in the ANC and in the NFP. So then the justification then for initiating the process from above was that the party wanted to avoid what has been happening in the other political parties that are occupying the political space in KwaZulu-Natal. But that doesn't rule out the fact that whatever happened did not follow the constitutional imperatives. I think that the leadership of the party was well aware of that. That is why when they came up with Hlabisa's name, they didn't say that he is now the leader of the party. They said they are going to suggest his name when the conference is convened and then allow the delegates to vote whether they agree with the leadership or not. So in this case then, things worked according to their plan because when the delegates met, they agreed that indeed Mr. Hlabisa is the right person to lead the party. So you might say then, as much as the issue appears to have not followed the constitution of the party, but the fact that there was an involvement of the delegates, they might say we did everything according to book if we were to confront them on this matter.
Aren't you nitpicking here, Prof? Because this is what effectively happens in all parties. I mean, the ANC can say what it wants to say about, how branches and everyone nominate leaders and how democratic the process is. But the facts of the matter, there is a great deal of engineering that happens across the board. Every political party we have does, more or less the same thing.
No, you are absolutely right when you say that even if the process starts from the bottom, from the branch level, of course there is influence, but then you call that lobbying. So lobbying is allowed in politics because you cannot all agree on the same candidate, but then those who are on the other side of the fence, you will negotiate with them and then try to reason with them and say, this is the candidate that I have in mind, these are the credentials, could you please support me? But then the difference then with other political parties is that this lobbying would be happening from the lower structures and then they will be escalated to the national leadership of the party. The difference with what happened in the IFP is that as much as lobbying happened, it happened amongst the leaders of the party, because they came together and then they lobbied one another in that meeting, and they said Hlabisa is the right person to lead the party, and they presented his credentials, which are not questionable, by the way. But then what then happened is that when they went down to the conference, they then said, as the leadership of the party, this is the name that we are suggesting. What are your views? Then other members of the delegation then said, we agree with you. They didn't say this in many words, but they said so when they voted. So I'm saying that as much as it is true that lobbying happens, the difference is that instead of it starting from the branches, in this case it started from the top. That is what makes it different from the other political parties.
In the conversation I had with the former president of the IFP the other day, but also in another conversation I had with his successor a couple of weeks ago, I asked them what they thought would be the relevance of the IFP in this country's future politics. I want to ask you, as someone who is obviously following this party very closely, what you think is the IFP's relevance?
I think that the IFP is relevant, and it will remain relevant in the party. This is in fact confirmed by how the party performed in the just concluded election in May this year. It increased its support from what it used to be, and that in itself shows you that there is a potential for the IFP to grow. You have the IFP as the fourth biggest party in the country, which means that as much as it is in fact enjoying more support in KwaZulu-Natal, which is its political base, but there is an attempt to try and spread to other provinces. So under the leadership of the current leader, Honorable Mr. Hlabisa, and given what he has been saying since assuming this position, one can only be optimistic that the party will grow outside of KwaZulu-Natal, because as I say, it has been growing in the province, but not that much outside the province. Even though nationally, it still garners support from the other provinces, but it has not reached the level where it's supposed to be. So I think that if they were to get this one right, and then make sure that they increase not only the membership, but also the support that they receive from other provinces, there will definitely be a force to be reckoned with. More especially given that the DA, which is the official opposition, seems to be losing grip, and then the EFF has been doing well, and the numbers has been increasing only if it could tone down on political rhetoric. So the IFP then is in a better position to look at what the ANC is doing, what the DA is doing, and what the EFF is doing, and then capitalize on that and try to do things differently. If they were to do that, they have a future.
But how will or do you think that the IFP's past, whichever way anyone interprets it, do you think that the IFP's past will have a bearing on its future? And I'm asking this because I sense, certainly from the interview I had with Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi the other day, but also from other conversations he's been having with other people, that he seems to be particularly sensitive about how, he is being judged, or how people see him, or how people interpret his legacy.
For every right there is a wrong, and for every wrong there is a right. Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi has been at the helm since 1975, and the longer you stay in a position, the more the possibilities of you committing mistakes. So like all other leaders, which is the same thing I said, by the way, when I was talking about the late President Mugabe of Zimbabwe, that if you stay in a position for too long, you are likely to commit mistakes. So in this case, Inkosi Mangosuthu Buthelezi has done exceptionally well in terms of growing the party, but then in the process he has also made mistakes like all other political parties. If, for example, we were to compare the IFP to the ANC started off well, and then somewhere along the lines it also lost grip. And then in this case, we are now talking about a factionalized ANC, something that is not a part of the DNA of the party. Even in 1969, when it had the Morogoro conference, The difference at that time is that they were open. They were discussing issues openly, and the issue of killing someone because you differ with him ideologically did not arise at that point. But right now, we see these things happening. Now, the IFP, therefore, is also having its fair share of its own internal problems. But then you cannot judge it basically based on the wrong things that it has done. You also have to judge it objectively by looking at both the good and the bad that the party has done. The same would apply to Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi. There are things that he has done well, and there are things that he hasn't done well. So if you were to judge him objectively, you would have to consider both sides of the coin, because if you focus on just one, then you are going to miss the point.
Well, interesting you say that, because a few things actually particularly caught my attention during our interview the other day. And among those was how his stance seems to have been, to put it mildly, been modified when he spoke about sanctions and the armed struggle. Here was someone who crisscrossed the world and was vehemently opposed to both the armed struggle and sanctions against apartheid. I just want you to take a listen to what he said around those two issues.
If I was a sellout, as you have been repeating now on television, why would they want to sully, this country and the history of all the leaders of this country by appointing a sellout and even wanting him to be the deputy president of the country? That's my answer to your question, where you repeat the vilification of me and say, am I a sellout? If a people says I'm a swine, do I become a swine? I don't turn into a pig. I mean, that thing which you are repeating, that is a narrative that I was a sellout. It doesn't rub off any skin off my nose at all, because I know that God knows and everyone knows that I'm not a sellout. I'm not a descendant of cowards. I don't come from a line of cowards. From both my father's and my mother's line of ascendants, we fought, and I've done my bit, and I'm not ashamed of anything I did. If I were to be asked to walk again this path, I would walk this step, because even the issue of economic sanctions, which I opposed it because it was going to impoverish the already very poor people in South Africa. In fact, I went to the capitals of the world. I went to see the Prime Minister. I went to see the Chancellor in Germany. I went to see the presidents of the United States, Carter, Bush, Reagan, to say that the multinational companies should not withdraw. When Msholozi was our president, you know that they've, even during the funeral of His Excellency President Mugabe, it was suggested that these sanctions against Zimbabwe should be lifted. So I asked Msholozi. He said that the ANC and the government are against sanctions against Zimbabwe. I said, Msholozi, why are you against them? He said, because the poor people would suffer. So I said, but Msholozi, you people vilified me and called me all sorts of names for that. Those sanctions were the very foundation of the poverty and the lack of jobs that we see today. But at the same time, I'm prepared to say that the sanctions did contribute to our liberation.
Prof, if he was to walk that path again, he would walk it pretty much the same way he did, yet at the same time concedes that both the armed struggle and sanctions did actually achieve what they were intended to achieve. Your thoughts?
No, first of all, Mr. Mbogo, I don't think that if Prince Buthelezi were to walk this path, he would definitely walk the same way he did. Because the context then and the context now is not the same. So there are a number of factors that would influence his thinking now, which were not there at the time when he took the positions he took. But having said that, he's right in saying that the ANC, in fact, respected him in a way, because they knew that he was an influential figure. When the ANC was in exile, Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi absorbed a number of ANC members who joined Inkatha under the guise of it being a cultural movement. Meanwhile, he was pushing the agenda of the ANC. And this was happening until 1979. As history would tell us, up to 1979, Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi used to visit Zambia, in fact, coordinating issues in the country and cooperating with the ANC and going there to report how far he had gone. So when the ANC took over then in 1994, there was no way that it would have sidelined him. That is why, of all the leaders of the opposition parties, Buthelezi is the only leader of the party that has served as acting president for a record 22 times. So on that one, I can give him, that is absolutely right, that the ANC, in fact, respected him, even though they might have differed with him on the issue of the armed struggle and the sanctions. Now, on the issue of the sanctions in particular, the reasons he put forth at the time was that if you implement sanctions, the people who are going to suffer the most are the very people who are trying to liberate. So the difference between the ANC leadership and Inkosi Mangosuthu Buthelezi was that the ANC wanted to get liberation and get it now. And the best way to get it was to put more pressure on the apartheid government. For Buthelezi, you needed to negotiate the process, but the problem is that that was going to take too long. So in other words, both the ANC and Inkosi Mangosuthu Buthelezi were fighting for the same cause, but the difference was their modus operandi. Inkosi Buthelezi said, let us take the longer route for as long as it will take us to where we want to go. And the ANC was saying, we've had enough. We tried to negotiate with the apartheid government. It didn't work. In 1961, we came up with the armed struggle. We formed the MK because the government could not listen to us. So there is no space for negotiations. So I think that Buthelezi and the ANC have always been on the same page. The difference was on the mode of operation. And that is why then others said he was a sellout, because in his view, he was fighting government from within. And then for the ANC, some of them said he was a sellout. That's where the issue of the sellout came in. Not necessarily that everyone in the ANC believed that indeed he was a sellout. If that were to be true, they would not have given him the acting position as the acting president for a record 22 times. It means they respected him, and then of course different presidents of the ANC afforded him a ministerial position, which means that they still believe that there was something he could contribute to this country.
We've run out of time, but I want to take you back where you started. Given how he was appointed or elected, will the new IFP president, Velenkosini Hlabisa, have the space to actually shape this political party in the manner that he feels will take it forward? Given the fact also that Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi is still there.
My understanding and the official position from the IFP through its leader, the current Honorable Velenkosini Hlabisa, is that Inkosi Buthelezi, in fact, was prepared to leave Parliament. But then it was the new leader, Honorable Hlabisa, who persuaded him to stay in Parliament while he consolidates the party in KwaZulu-Natal, while he continues to lead the leadership of the party in the province of KwaZulu-Natal. So if that explanation is anything to go by, then it means that Inkosi Buthelezi is not in fact blocking any avenue for the new leader to express himself. Then it will be up to him as to how he positions himself. But whether he will be respected in the same manner that Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi was respected, that is something that we'll see in the course of time.
Professor Bheki Mngomezulu, thank you very much for your time and insights this evening. He is from the University of the Western Cape.